The desert sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the empty highway. In the heart of a forgotten town called Dust Haven, where the wind whispered secrets through rusted diner signs, a single mother named Emily Harper wiped sweat from her brow. Her small roadside eatery, Harper's Haven, was little more than a weathered shack with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered like a dying heartbeat. Inside, the air smelled of sizzling burgers and fresh coffee, but beneath it all lingered the faint tang of desperation. Emily's hands trembled as she plated another meal, her calloused fingers aching from 12-hour shifts. She had 2 kids, little Nathan, 7 years old with eyes too wise for his age, and Sophia, 5, who clutched a faded stuffed bear like it was her only shield. They were her world, pieced together after her husband vanished into the night 2 years back, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and a heart full of unanswered questions. It started on a Tuesday evening, the kind where thunder rumbled in the distance but never quite broke. Emily was closing up early, her pockets lighter than the dust on the shelves. Nathan and Sophia sat at the counter picking at cold fries, their stomachs growling in quiet protest. The diner had been dead all day, no travelers, no locals with extra cash, just the hum of the old fridge and the distant roar of engines on the highway. That's when the door creaked open, letting in a gust of hot wind and the silhouette of a man who looked like he'd ridden straight out of a storm. He was broad-shouldered, leather vest patched with faded insignia, his face weathered like old leather under a salt-and-pepper beard. Daniel Iron Reeves, though she didn't know his name yet, eased onto a stool, his boots thudding softly against the linoleum. Emily forced a smile, the kind that hid the cracks in her resolve. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice steady despite the knot in her throat. He glanced at the menu, then at the kids, his dark eyes softening for a split second. "Just coffee and whatever's hot," he replied, his tone gravelly from years of wind and road. She poured the coffee black, slid over a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. On the house, though she couldn't afford it. "Looks like you could use it," she said simply, turning away before he could argue. Daniel paused, fork midway to his mouth, watching as she ruffled Nathan's hair and whispered something that made Sophia giggle. In that moment, something shifted in the air, thick as the steam rising from his plate. He ate in silence, but when he stood to leave, he left a 20 on the counter, double what the meal was worth. "Appreciate it," he muttered, tipping his head. Emily pocketed the bill, relief flooding her like cool water, but she waved it off. "Pay it forward sometime." Words spread through the biker grapevine like wildfire on dry grass. Daniel rode with the Iron Promise crew, a tight-knit brotherhood of wanderers who'd sworn oaths to each other back in their military days. Promises forged in foxholes and forgotten wars, binding them tighter than blood. They weren't outlaws, not really, just men carrying scars from battles no one else remembered, riding the endless roads in search of purpose. A week later, another rider pulled in, tall with tattoos snaking up his arms like vines. Then 2 more, their Harleys growling in unison outside the diner. Emily saw the pattern forming, the way their eyes lit up at her simple kindness. She couldn't turn them away. For months it became ritual, dusty boots tracking in sand, the low rumble of engines idling as they shared stories in hushed tones, plates piled high with ribs, chili, apple pie, all free, or close to it. Emily scraped by on tips from the rare trucker, dipping into her savings for flour and beef. Nathan would watch from the window, fascinated by the chrome gleaming under the sunset, while Sophia drew pictures of the nice motormen on napkins. But the weight pressed heavier each day. Bills stacked like storm clouds, rent for the tiny apartment above the diner, Nathan's school fees, Sophia's cough that wouldn't quit without medicine she couldn't buy. One night, as rain finally lashed the windows, Emily collapsed into a chair after the last biker left. Her hands shook as she counted pennies, tears blurring the numbers. "Mommy, why do you give them food?" Nathan asked, his small voice cutting through the patter of drops. She pulled him close, the scent of rain mixing with the lingering aroma of gravy. "Because sometimes kindness is all we got left," she whispered, "and it comes back around." Little did she know, across the highway in a roadside motel, Daniel sat with his crew, maps spread out under the dim lamp. "That woman's got heart," he said, voice low, "feeding us like family when she can barely feed her own." The others nodded, memories of their own losses surfacing, brothers gone, promises unkept. "We owe her," one murmured. Daniel's jaw set. "More than that. We stand for her." The first real crack came on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where frost kissed the diner windows like fragile lace. Emily was flipping pancakes when the phone rang, shrill against the sizzle of batter. It was the school. Nathan had collapsed during recess, feverish and pale, his little body finally giving out from the malnutrition she'd tried to hide. Panic clawed at her chest as she rushed out, leaving Sophia with a neighbor. At the clinic, a squat building on the edge of town with flickering fluorescent lights, the doctor delivered the blow. Nathan needed tests, specialists, weeks of care she couldn't pay for. "He's malnourished, ma'am. And there's something else, signs of strain on his heart." Emily's world tilted, the sterile smell of antiseptic choking her. Sophia clung to her leg, tiny sobs echoing in the hallway. Word reached Daniel by noon, carried on the wind of a passing rider. He was fueling up at the gas station when his phone buzzed. A brother's voice, urgent. "The kid from the diner. It's bad." Daniel's grip tightened on the pump, gasoline fumes sharp in his nostrils. He revved his engine, the roar a promise in itself. By evening, the Iron Promise crew assembled. Not the usual handful, but dozens, their bikes lining the highway like a steel river. They rolled into Dust Haven under a sky-bruised purple, headlights cutting through the dusk. Emily looked up from her empty diner, exhaustion etched in every line of her face, as the convoy pulled to a stop outside. Daniel dismounted first, helmet under his arm, his presence steady as an anchor. "Heard about the boy," he said, voice cutting through the engine's dying hum. "We're here for you, Emily, all of us." In that instant, as the bikers formed a quiet wall of leather and loyalty, Emily felt the first spark of hope pierce the darkness. These weren't strangers anymore. They were the family she'd fed with her last scraps, bound now by an unspoken vow. What they would do next would ripple through the town like thunder, shocking everyone who thought kindness was a fool's game. But for Daniel and his brothers, it was simple. A promise kept, a debt repaid in the only way they knew, with unyielding honor. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and alive with possibility, but Emily's mind raced with fear. Nathan lay in the clinic bed, hooked to monitors that beeped like accusatory whispers. Sophia slept fitfully in a chair beside her, the stuffed bear tucked under her chin. Daniel lingered in the waiting room, his crew fanned out like sentinels, some grabbing vending machine coffee, others murmuring plans in low tones. "We can't let this slide," Daniel said to his second, a wiry veteran named Lucas. "She's been our haven. Time we become hers." Lucas nodded, eyes scanning the sterile walls. "But the system's rigged. Hospital bills, insurance denials. It's a trap for folks like her." The weight of old battles hung between them, reminders of promises made in distant sands, where loyalty meant survival. As night deepened, the crew moved like shadows. One rider, a former mechanic named Tyler, hotwired the diner's generator to keep the lights on. No more blackouts for Emily's home. Another quiet Ethan, with hands scarred from firefighting days, slipped into the clinic's back office, pulling strings with a nurse he'd known from a charity run. "Tell the doc the boy's covered," he instructed, sliding an envelope of cash scraped from their road fund. It wasn't much, but it bought time. tests scheduled, meds approved, without the red tape strangling single moms. Emily emerged from Nathan's room at midnight, eyes red-rimmed, only to find the waiting area transformed. Sandwiches from a late-night grill, blankets for the kids, even a toy truck for Sophia, gifts from men who'd once been ghosts on the highway. Word of the bikers' vigil spread through Dusthaven like smoke from a backfire. The town sheriff, a paunchy man named Harlan, with a badge tarnished by small-town corruption, rolled up in his cruiser, lights flashing unnecessarily. "What's this circus?" he barked, eyeing the lineup of Harleys. Daniel stepped forward, calm as a still pond. "Just supporting a friend, Sheriff. No trouble here." Harlan snorted, glancing at Emily through the glass doors. "That woman's behind on taxes. Dinah's a fire hazard. I could shut it down tomorrow." The threat hung heavy, laced with the greed of officials who'd long overlooked the vulnerable for their own gain. The crew tensed, engines rumbling in idle warning, but Daniel raised a hand. "You touch her place. You deal with all of us." It wasn't a threat, it was a vow, echoing the oaths that bound them. By dawn, as the first light gilded the clinic windows, Nathan's fever broke. Emily held his hand, whispering stories of far-off adventures, while outside, the Iron Promise riders formed a convoy unlike any Dusthaven had seen. They weren't riding away, they were riding for her, for the kids, for the promise of justice in a world that often forgot it. What shocked the town wasn't the noise of their departure, but the silence of their resolve. Quiet acts that would upend everything Harlan thought he controlled. Emily watched from the window, tears mixing with gratitude, knowing this was only the beginning of the redemption her family so desperately needed. The first rays of dawn pierced the clinic's thin curtains like hesitant promises, painting the waiting room in hues of gold and shadow. Emily sat beside Nathan's bed, her fingers interlaced with his small ones, the steady beep of the monitor a fragile rhythm against the quiet. Sophia had curled up on the edge of the mattress, her breathing soft and even, the stuffed bear rising and falling with her chest. Outside, the Iron Promise crew lingered like guardians from another world, their bikes a gleaming phalanx under the awakening sky, exhaust fumes mingling with the scent of dew-kissed asphalt. Daniel leaned against his Harley, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the sheriff's cruiser, idling across the lot. Harlan's words from the night before echoed in his mind, a venomous undercurrent to the morning calm. Threats of shutdowns, taxes unpaid, a life dismantled piece by piece. Emily stepped out into the crisp air, the door hissing shut behind her. Her face was drawn, but there was a flicker of steel in her eyes now, forged in the night's vigil. "He's stable," she said to Daniel. Her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor says the meds are working, but the bills, they'll bury us." Daniel nodded, pushing off his bike with a creak of leather. "Won't let that happen. We've got your back." He gestured to the crew, dozens strong now, riders from as far as the state line, drawn by the invisible thread of brotherhood. Lucas, ever the strategist, approached with a thermos of hot coffee, steam curling like unspoken worries. "We pulled what we could, covers the next week, but that sheriff, he's got claws in this town deeper than roots." Harlan hadn't left entirely. His cruiser lurked at the lot's edge, a predator circling. As if summoned by their words, he swaggered over, badge glinting mockingly in the sunlight. "Morning, folks. Hope you got permits for this little rally." His voice dripped with false joviality, eyes narrowing on Emily. "Ma'am, that diner's on borrowed time. Code violations up to the roof. Pay up, or I padlock it by noon." Emily's breath caught, the weight of isolation crashing back, the endless shifts, the empty registers, the kids' hollow cheeks she'd tried to fill with scraps. But Daniel stepped between them, his presence a wall of quiet authority. "She's paid enough already, Sheriff, in ways you wouldn't understand." Harlan chuckled, low and mean. "Outlaws playing hero? Cute. But this town's mine to run." He spat on the gravel, turning away with a parting shot. "Clear out before I call in reinforcements." The crew didn't scatter, they coalesced. As the sun climbed, engines roared to life in a symphony of resolve, the convoy peeling out toward Harper's Haven. Emily followed in her battered pickup. Sophia buckled in beside her, Nathan safe with the nurse friend for the morning. The diner came into view, a squat beacon amid the dust, its signs sputtering faintly. But as they pulled up, the reality hit like a gut punch. Yellow tape fluttered across the door, and courtesy of Harlan's early morning decree. "Temporarily closed for violations," a handwritten notice read, the ink still fresh. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, a sob escaping. "Everything. It's all we have." Sophia peered out the window, confusion etching her young face. "Mummy, why can't we go in?" Daniel dismounted, ripping the tape down with deliberate slowness. The sound sharp as tearing fabric. "This ends today." The riders fanned out, a tide of leather and determination. Tyler, the mechanic, popped the hood of the diner's ancient generator, tools clinking as he bypassed frayed wires. Ethan coordinated with a few locals, a baker who'd heard whispers, a farmer with a truckload of produce, turning the parking lot into an impromptu market. Tables unfolded from bike trailers, laden with loaves still warm from ovens, crates of apples red as rubies, jars of honey glistening under the sun. "No charge?" Ethan called to the gathering townsfolk, his voice carrying over the murmur. "Just pay it forward to Harper's when she's back." Word rippled through Dusthaven. The bikers weren't invaders, they were lifelines, their chrome shields against the sheriff's greed. By midday, the lot buzzed with life, families picnicking on the grass, kids chasing each other around the Harleys, laughter cutting through the tension like sunlight through clouds. Emily watched from her truck, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, as strangers who'd once ignored her struggles now lined up to help. A retired teacher slipped her a check for Nathan's care, eyes misty. "Saw what you did for those riders. Time someone did for you." Sophia toddled out, clutching a fresh muffin, her smile tentative but blooming. Nathan, discharged early against protocol thanks to Ethan's connections, arrived in a crew member's sidecar, waving weakly from under a blanket. The sight twisted something deep in Emily's chest, her boy, pale but alive, surrounded by these rough-hewn angels. But Harlan wasn't done. He arrived with backup, 2 deputies in crisp uniforms, their cruisers blocking the highway access. "Disperse this now!" he bellowed, megaphone amplifying his bluster. "Unlawful assembly! That woman's operation is shut down!" The crew paused, engines idling low, a growl of restrained thunder. Daniel walked forward alone, hands open, the sun casting his shadow long and unyielding. "We're not breaking laws, Sheriff. We're upholding one, the kind that matters. Honor." Harlan's face reddened, veins bulging. "Honor? You bikers know nothing of that. I've got the mayor in my pocket, the council too. One call and your whole club's history." It was a bluff laced with truth. Corruption festered in Dusthaven like rot in old wood, officials skimming fines, turning blind eyes to the vulnerable. Lucas sidled up to Daniel, murmuring urgently, "He's right about the strings, but we've got our own network. Veterans groups, old war buddies in the State House. One rider's already on the line to Sacramento." Daniel's eyes hardened. Memories surfacing, a foxhole promised to a fallen brother. "We leave no one behind." He faced Harlan squarely. "You shut her down. You shut down every soul she's fed, and we'll make sure the world knows why. Every newspaper, every forum, every ear that listens." The sheriff faltered, the weight of unseen eyes pressing in. The deputies shifted uneasily, glancing at the crowd now filming on phones, the digital tide turning. As the standoff stretched, a new rumble echoed from the horizon, not threat but reinforcement. More bikes crested the hill, banners fluttering with the Iron Promise emblem, riders who'd ridden through the night from distant chapters. Harlan's bluster deflated. He barked orders to retreat, cruisers peeling away in a spray of gravel. The lot erupted in cheers, but Emily felt the deeper tremor. These men weren't saviors by chance. They were bound by oaths older than the roads they traveled, repaying a mother's quiet generosity with a fortress of loyalty. Nathan tugged at her hand, his voice small but clear. "Mommy, the motormen, they're like family." She knelt, pulling him close, the scent of fresh bread and engine oil wrapping around them. In that moment, amid the whirl of activity, Emily glimpsed the promise unfolding. Not just survival, but redemption, a circle of kindness closing against the darkness. Yet shadows lingered. Harlan's retreat was temporary, his corruption a hydra with more heads. What the crew planned next would shake the town's foundations, proving that true power lay not in badges or decrees, but in the unbreakable word of those who'd chosen to stand together. The midday sun beat down on Harper's Haven parking lot like a relentless judge, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage that blurred the line between hope and haze. Emily stood amid the makeshift feast, the air thick with the aroma of warm bread and grilled corn from the farmers' donations, mingling with the metallic tang of cooling Harley engines. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Townsfolk, who'd once passed her diner without a glance, now shared plates, their faces softened by the unexpected bounty. Nathan, propped up on a folding chair with a blanket over his knees, nibbled on a slice of apple, his color returning like dawn chasing shadows. Sophia darted between legs, her giggles chasing a stray balloon tied to a bike's handlebar, the simple joy a balm against the ache in Emily's chest. But beneath the surface buzz, tension coiled like a spring, Harlan's retreat echoing as a hollow victory. Daniel circled the lot on foot, his boots crunching gravel as he coordinated with the newcomers, riders from distant outposts, their vests embroidered with faded iron promise patches that spoke of roads traveled and battles endured. "We've got eyes on the sheriff," he said to Lucas, who nodded while handing out water bottles to the kids playing nearby. "But this ain't over. He's got friends in high places, council meetings rigged, fines funneled to his pockets." Lucas's face, etched with lines from years under desert suns, tightened. "Reminds me of back then, in the sands. One corrupt officer could doom a whole unit. We promised each other, no one gets left to the wolves." The words hung heavy, a reminder of oaths sworn in foxholes, where loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Daniel clapped his shoulder, the gesture firm. "Then we fight clean, for her, for them." Emily approached, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron, the fabric worn thin from endless washes. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, glancing at Nathan, who waved a sticky hand from his perch. It's more than food. It's life." Daniel met her gaze, his eyes steady as weathered stone. "You gave us yours first. Plates when your pantry was bare. Ears when we needed to unload ghosts from the road. This is payback, Emily, ironclad." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, the scent of fresh coffee from a communal pot grounding her. But as the afternoon waned, a shadow fell. Literally, as Harlan's cruiser reappeared at the lot's edge, this time flanked by a sleek black SUV, its tinted windows hiding whoever pulled the strings. The sheriff exited first, his posture all bluster, but the man from the SUV was different, tall, suited, with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Councilman Ellis, a name whispered in Dusthaven's backrooms, the kind of official who polished his image with ribbon cuttings while squeezing the life from small businesses. "Ms. Harper," Ellis called, voice smooth as oil. "This gathering violates zoning ordinances. Your diner's closure stands until inspections and payments are cleared." He eyed the bikers with thinly veiled disdain, as if their leather and chrome were stains on his pristine world. Emily's heart sank, the joy of the morning fracturing. "Please, it's our home, the kids." Sophia, sensing the shift, clutched her mother's leg, her small fingers digging in. The crew didn't charge. They formed a loose circle, engines off but presence unyielding. Tyler stepped forward, wiping grease from his hands on a rag. Inspections. We fixed what needed fixing. Wiring, plumbing, all above board. Ellis smirked, flipping through his clipboard. Not according to records. And these interlopers? They're drawing crowds, disrupting traffic. One call to the state patrol, and this becomes a felony assembly. Harlan loomed behind, arms crossed, his earlier defeat fueling a petty fire. Daniel felt the old rage stir, memories of betrayed trusts in uniform flashing like lightning. Brothers lost to bureaucracy's cold blade, but he held steady, turning to Emily. Let us handle this. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the lot in amber light, the Iron Promise riders moved with purposeful grace. Ethan, drawing on his firefighting past, rallied a few locals with tales of community aid runs, turning the confrontation into a dialogue. We've got petitions circulating, he said to Ellis, holding up a stack of signatures gathered in the afternoon's warmth. Names from farmers, teachers, even the clinic nurse. Hundreds standing with Harper's. Shut it down, and you shut down Dusthaven's heart. The councilman faltered, the weight of public eyes pressing in, phones still capturing every word. Meanwhile, Lucas worked the shadows, his call to Sacramento bearing fruit. A state inspector, an old war acquaintance, promised a review by morning, bypassing Harlan's local chokehold. Emily watched it unfold, the sensory whirlwind grounding her, the sizzle of burgers on a portable grill, the low hum of conversations weaving hope, the faint rumble of idling bikes like a protective heartbeat. Nathan, invigorated by the meds and the makeshift family around him, toddled over to Daniel, tugging at his vest. Mr. Iron, will you ride with us someday? Daniel knelt, the gravel biting his knees, and ruffled the boy's hair. Count on it, kid. We'll make sure your mom's place shines brighter than any chrome. The innocence in Nathan's eyes pierced him. A mirror to the promises he'd nearly forgotten, vows to protect the vulnerable, to build something lasting from the ruins of loss. But Ellis wasn't yielding easily. He leaned in close to Emily, voice a confidential hiss. Sign this waiver, cede the diner to municipal auction, and we'll waive the kids' medical debts, a clean slate. The offer slithered like smoke, tempting in its poison, preying on her exhaustion. Emily's hands trembled, the clipboard a symbol of everything she'd fought. The husband's abandonment, the endless grind, the fear of losing her children to a system that devoured the weak. Tears welled, but she pushed it back, glancing at Sophia, who now sat on Tyler's lap, listening to a story of desert adventures. No, she said, voice gaining strength. That's not a slate, that's surrender. The standoff broke as dusk settled, Ellis retreating with a curt nod, Harlan trailing like a scolded dog. The lot cleared slowly, townsfolk packing up with promises to return, leaving behind crates of supplies for the diner, enough to stock shelves for weeks. Emily sank onto a bench, the wood warm from the day's heat as Daniel sat beside her. You did good standing firm, he said softly. But tomorrow, we dig deeper. Harlan's got ledgers, hidden ones, we'll uncover them. She nodded, the first stars pricking the sky like distant allies. In that quiet interlude, with the kids asleep in the truck and the crew's fires crackling nearby, Emily felt the circle tighten. Not just survival, but a legacy of loyalty blooming from her quiet acts of grace. Yet as night fully cloaked Dusthaven, a lone rider peeled away from the group, heading toward the town's dim-lit edges. Secrets festered there, corruption's underbelly, and the Iron Promise was poised to expose it. What they unearthed would shock the core of the town, redeeming not just Emily's family, but the soul of a place long starved of honor. The road ahead twisted with ethical thorns, but for these brothers of the wind, the promise burned brighter than fear. The moon hung low over Dusthaven like a tarnished silver coin, casting elongated shadows that danced across the town's forgotten alleys. The lone rider, a grizzled veteran named Jonathan with eyes sharp as switchblades, eased his bike to a crawl near the sheriff's office, a squat brick building on the outskirts, its windows glowing faintly like wary eyes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and stale cigarette smoke, carried on a breeze that rustled the overgrown weeds. Jonathan killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the distant hum of crickets and the occasional creak of a loose shutter. He'd volunteered for this shadow run, driven by a promise whispered in the crew's campfire circle: unearth the rot before it spread further. Harlan's threats weren't idle. They were threads in a web that ensnared the whole town, from rigged bids to silenced complaints. Slipping off his bike, Jonathan moved like a ghost, his boots silent on the gravel. The back door to the office was ajar, sloppy, but telling of Harlan's arrogance. Inside, the air was stale, laced with the musty odor of old files and cheap coffee grounds. He navigated the dim hallway by the light of his phone, heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs, memories surfacing of midnight raids in forgotten wars where one wrong step meant the end. The records room was a chaos of stacked boxes and overflowing cabinets, dust motes swirling in his flashlight beam. He rifled through folders labeled with mundane town business. Permits, fines, auctions, but his gut pulled him to a locked drawer, its padlock rusted but sturdy. A quick twist with a tool from his vest, and it gave way with a soft click. Papers spilled out like confessions, ledgers detailing kickbacks from local merchants, donations funneled to Harlan's personal accounts, even notations on properties seized under false pretenses. Jonathan's breath caught as he scanned one file. Harper's Haven, marked with escalating violations that hadn't existed months ago. But deeper in, a name jumped out like a spark in the dark. Emily's husband, Mark Harper. Not just a missing person report from 2 years back, but a sealed addendum scribbled in Harlan's hand. Debt settled via collateral, body unrecovered, accident ruled. Jonathan's hands froze, the paper crinkling under his grip. Mark hadn't vanished into the night. He'd been pushed, tangled in Harlan's extortion racket, after refusing to pay protection on a trucking route. The sheriff had covered it as a desert mishap. No investigation, no questions. Rage simmered, hot and ethical, clashing with the crew's code. Justice without vengeance, truth over fists. He snapped photos, the camera's shutter a whisper in the quiet, then slipped the originals into his jacket. As he retreated, a floorboard groaned under his weight, too late. Harlan's voice boomed from the front, slurred with whiskey. "Who's there?" Jonathan bolted for the back, heart slamming. But the sheriff was faster, bursting into the room with a flashlight and drawn sidearm. The beam pinned Jonathan against the wall, illuminating stacks of incriminating files. "You!" Harlan snarled, recognition dawning. "Biker scum, breaking and entering. That's jail time, federal." Jonathan raised his hands slowly, the weight of the evidence burning against his chest. "Not breaking, exposing. You've been bleeding this town dry, Harlan. And Emily's husband. That wasn't no accident." The sheriff's face twisted, a mask of fury cracking to reveal fear. He lunged, but Jonathan sidestepped, the scuffle muffled, fists glancing off leather, a chair toppling with a crash. Harlan's radio crackled to life, calling for deputies, but Jonathan broke free, dashing into the night with the wind whipping his face. He mounted his bike, engine roaring to life like a battle cry, tires spitting gravel as he tore toward the highway. Behind him, sirens wailed, a chase unfolding under the indifferent stars. The road twisted through scrubland, headlights slicing the darkness, Jonathan's mind racing faster than his Harley. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was a moral crossroads for the Iron Promise. Expose Harlan legally, risk the evidence being buried by his connections, or go public raw, inviting chaos but honoring the promise of unfiltered truth. Dawn was breaking by the time he rendezvoused with the crew at a deserted pullout miles from Dusthaven, the sky streaking pink and gold over the horizon. Daniel waited, arms crossed. The group gathered around a low fire, Lucas nursing coffee, Tyler tinkering with a spare part, Ethan keeping watch. Emily was there too, having insisted on coming after a restless night at the diner, Nathan and Sophia safe with the nurse. Her eyes widened as Jonathan dismounted, breathless, handing over the phone and pilfered pages. "It's worse than we thought," he panted, the scent of exertion clinging to him. Harlan offed her husband, covered it up to hide his scams. Emily's knees buckled, Daniel catching her arm as a gasp escaped her lips. The world tilted, the unanswered questions, the grief she'd buried under endless shifts, now unearthed, like a wound reopened. Tears carved paths down her cheeks, but beneath them burned a fierce light. "He took everything," she whispered, clutching the papers, the ink blurring under her fingers. "But you brought it back." The crew fell silent, the fire's crackle underscoring the gravity. Daniel scanned the evidence, his jaw set like forged steel. "This changes the play. We take it to the state attorney. Clean by the book, no vigilante moves." Lucas nodded, but doubt flickered in his eyes, the ethical bind tightening. Trust a system riddled with Harlan's allies, or risk fracturing their oath? Jonathan wiped sweat from his brow, the night's adrenaline fading into resolve. "It's a promise we keep. For Mark, for her kids, truth first." As the sun crested fully, bathing the group in warm light, they mounted up, the convoy forming a steel-clad escort back to town. Emily rode with Daniel, the rumble of engines vibrating through her bones, a sensory anchor amid the storm. Word of the discovery spread like embers on dry tinder, phones buzzing, locals stirring from sleep. By the time they reached Harper's Haven, a crowd had gathered, murmurs rippling through the morning air, thick with anticipation and the aroma of fresh dew. Harlan's cruiser sat empty at the edge, a ghost of defeat. But the real shock was unfolding inside Emily. Not just vengeance, but redemption, the pieces of her shattered life knitting together through the loyalty of these road-worn brothers. The revelation hung over Dusthaven like a gathering thunderhead, promising a moral reckoning that would test every vow the Iron Promise held dear. Emily glanced at her children, playing tentatively in the diner's yard, their laughter a fragile melody against the unknown. For the first time in years, hope felt tangible, forged in the fire of quiet honor. If this chapter's twists gripped you, smash that like button below. It helps spread these stories of unbreakable loyalty far and wide. The morning light filtered through the diner's grimy windows, casting fractured patterns on the checkered floor, like pieces of a puzzle finally aligning. Emily stood behind the counter, her hands steady as she poured coffee for the first wave of locals trickling in. Farmers with calloused palms, teachers with briefcases clutched tight, all drawn by the whispers that had ignited overnight. The air hummed with the scent of frying bacon and percolating brew, a comforting veil over the storm brewing beneath. Nathan and Sophia played in the corner booth, their laughter punctuating the low murmur of conversations. Nathan stacking sugar packets into a makeshift tower, while Sophia colored a napkin with crayons, scavenged from a rider's saddlebag. For Emily, it was a fragile normalcy, the evidence of Harlan's crimes tucked safely in Daniel's saddlebag, waiting like a loaded gun. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, his leather vest creaking softly as he scanned the room. The crew had dispersed strategically, some patrolling the perimeter on their bikes, engines purring like watchful sentinels, others blending into the crowd to gather more testimonies. Lucas sat at a corner table, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with the state inspector whose arrival was imminent. "Yeah, we've got witnesses lined up," he murmured, his voice a gravelly anchor. Farmers squeezed for fees, shops shuttered on bogus claims. It all ties back to him. Jonathan, still wired from the night's escapade, nursed a mug nearby, his knuckles bruised, but eyes clear. The weight of Mark's file pressed on them all, a ghost resurrected, demanding justice without descending into the chaos Harlan thrived on. Emily slid a plate of eggs across to a grizzled rancher, her smile practiced but genuine. "On the house today," she said, the words tasting of defiance. The man nodded, gratitude etching deeper lines on his face. "Heard what those riders dug up. About your husband and the sheriff's games. Brave what you're doing." She paused, the fork in her hand trembling slightly, the aroma of sizzling hash browns suddenly sharp. Mark's face flashed in her mind, his easy grin, the way he'd hum old road songs while fixing the diner's leaky roof. Gone not by choice, but by a bully's greed. "It's not bravery," she replied softly. "It's what he would have wanted." Standing tall. Outside, the highway hummed with approaching traffic, but a deeper rumble built, the convoy returning from their sweeps, bikes gleaming under the climbing sun. The state inspector's van pulled up first, a nondescript white vehicle kicking up dust that settled like fine powder on the parked Harleys. Out stepped a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, her badge catching the light. Agent Rivera, an ally pulled from Lucas's network of old service connections. She shook Daniel's hand firmly, the grip speaking volumes. "Your intel checks out on paper, but we need the town to back it. Publicly." Emily watched from the window, heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. Sophia tugged at her apron. "Mummy, are the good guys winning?" Emily knelt, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead, the faint scent of soap and innocence grounding her. "They are, sweetie, because of promises like theirs." The parking lot transformed into an open forum as Rivera set up a folding table, her recorder ready. Townsfolk gathered, the air thickening with tension and the earthy smell of trampled grass. Harlan arrived fashionably late, his cruiser screeching to a halt, face thunderous under the brim of his hat. Flanked by deputies, he pushed through the crowd, badge polished to a mocking shine. "This is harassment," he barked, eyes locking on Emily through the diner's glass. "False accusations from a pack of drifters. I'll have you all in cuffs." But the momentum had shifted. A farmer stepped forward first, voice steady as he recounted years of donations that left his fields fallow. Then the baker, her hands flour-dusted, detailing how Harlan's inspections had nearly bankrupted her ovens. Daniel stood at the edge, arms crossed, his presence a quiet bulwark. Jonathan handed Rivera the pilfered files, the papers rustling like dry leaves in the breeze. She flipped through them methodically, her expression hardening at Mark's addendum. "This is obstruction of justice, Sheriff, and worse, possible manslaughter covered as accident." Harlan's bluster faltered, sweat beading on his brow despite the morning chill. "Lies, fabricated by thieves in the night." But the crowd murmured dissent, phones raised, capturing every evasion. Emily emerged then, Nathan at her side, his small hand in hers, a talisman of resolve. Sophia trailed behind, clutching her bear. The sight of the children, pale from hardship but unbowed, silenced the lot, a poignant tableau under the vast sky. "You took my husband," Emily said, her voice carrying clear and unbroken, the words slicing through the hush like a blade. "Pushed him into that ravine because he wouldn't play your game. Left me to scrape by, thinking it was fate." Harlan's eyes darted, the color draining from his face as Rivera nodded, recorder whirring. "We have the ledgers, the notations, and witnesses who saw his truck that night. Tampered brakes, no accident." The sheriff staggered back, deputies exchanging uneasy glances, the weight of exposure crashing down. Nathan looked up at him, eyes wide but fearless. "You hurt my daddy, but these men, they helped Mommy. They're the real heroes." The simplicity of it pierced the air, a child's truth exposing the rot. Chaos erupted then, not violence, but a tide of reckoning. More locals came forward, stories tumbling out like pent-up rain, evictions for the elderly, fines on the grieving, all feeding Harlan's coffers. Rivera radioed for state backup, her voice crisp over the static. The sheriff lunged for the files, but Tyler blocked him cleanly, a hand on his shoulder like an iron clamp. "Easy now. Let the truth ride." Engines revved in support, the iron promise forming a ring of chrome and loyalty, their silence more thunderous than any roar. Emily pulled her kids close, the scent of dust and justice mingling, tears of release blurring her vision. Harlan was cuffed amid flashing lights from arriving troopers, his empire crumbling under the relentless light of day. As the lot cleared, the sun high and unforgiving, Emily turned to Daniel, the crew gathering like a chosen kin. "You didn't just save the diner," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You gave us back our story, our family." He nodded, the lines around his eyes softening. "Promises kept, Emily. That's what we ride for." Nathan hugged his leg, Sophia beaming up with a grin that lit the horizon. The shock rippled outward, Dust Haven transformed, not by force, but by the unyielding honor of those who'd chosen to stand. Yet as the dust settled, a deeper bond formed, one that would carry them through whatever shadows lingered, proving that loyalty's legacy outshone even the darkest betrayals. The afternoon sun slanted across the diner's parking lot, turning the scattered gravel into a mosaic of gold and shadow, as if the sky itself were bearing witness. Emily wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric stiff with dried flour and the faint residue of spilled syrup. Her gaze fixed on the spot where Harlan had been led away in cuffs. The state troopers' cruisers idled nearby, their lights no longer flashing, but pulsing like the last beats of a defeated heart. The air carried the mingled scents of cooling engine oil, fresh-cut grass from the impromptu gathering, and the underlying earthiness of relief washing over Dust Haven. Townsfolk lingered in clusters, their voices a low weave of astonishment and vindication, stories exchanged like treasures unearthed, each one a thread pulling the town from Harlan's grip. Daniel stood with the crew at the lot's edge, his broad frame silhouetted against the horizon, the iron promise emblem on his vest, catching the light like a badge of quiet triumph. Lucas holstered his phone, the call to Sacramento complete. His face etched with the satisfaction of a battle won, without a single shot fired. "The state's taking over the investigation," he said, voice rough from the day's commands. "Harlan's accounts frozen, his deputies spilling names already. Mark's case, it's open, priority." Jonathan nodded beside him, flexing his bruised knuckles, the night's shadows still clinging to his eyes. "No more cover-ups. Justice rides straight now." The words hung between them, a reaffirmation of the oaths that had drawn them from distant roads, promises born in the grit of shared scars, now extended to a mother and her children like an unbreakable chain. Emily emerged from the diner, Nathan and Sophia trailing her like small shadows, their steps tentative on the uneven ground. Nathan's cheeks held a flush of color, the clinic's meds working their quiet miracle, while Sophia clutched her bear tighter, her wide eyes taking in the dispersing crowd. The sensory hum of the scene enveloped them, the distant whinny of a horse from a nearby ranch, the rustle of wind through chain-link fences, the faint acrid tang of trooper radios crackling with updates. "It's really over?" Emily asked Daniel, her voice a fragile bridge across the chasm of years. He turned, his expression softening, the lines of his face mapping roads traveled and burdens carried. "For Harlan, yeah, but for you, this is just the start. The diners cleared, inspections waived, taxes forgiven under the new review. Your haven stands. She glanced at the building, its neon sign flickering back to life with a soft buzz, courtesy of Tyler's final tweaks to the wiring. Inside, the counter gleamed under fresh polish, shelves restocked with donations that would sustain them through the lean months ahead. A wave of emotion crested, grief for Mark, sharp and renewed, mingling with gratitude that bloomed like wildflowers after rain. You turned strangers into saviors," she murmured, pulling Nathan close. The boy looked up at Daniel, his small hand extended. "Thank you, Mr. Iron, for finding Daddy's truth." Daniel knelt, the gravel shifting under his weight, and clasped the child's hand gently, the calluses of his palm meeting Nathan's soft skin in a silent pact. "We ride for truths like that, kid, and for families like yours." As the troopers packed up, Agent Rivera approached, her clipboard now a relic of formality. "Ms. Harper, the evidence is ironclad. Harlan's facing charges, extortion, obstruction, and we'll push for homicide on your husband's case. The town council's dissolving his alliances as we speak." She nodded to the crew, respect etching her features. "You gentlemen, your network saved months of red tape. Clean work." Ethan, ever the quiet force, tipped his head. "Just keeping promises, ma'am. The ones that matter." Rivera smiled faintly, then turned to Emily. "There's restitution coming. Funds recovered from his schemes. For the kids' care, the diner. A fresh start." The words landed like rain on parched soil, soaking into the cracks of Emily's resolve, promising not just survival, but growth. The crowd began to thin, locals drifting back to their lives with handshakes and murmured vows to patronize Harper's haven come morning. A farmer clapped Daniel on the back, his voice thick. "You bikers ain't what the rumors say. You're the spine this place needed." Sophia tugged at Emily's hand, pointing to a rider polishing his chrome under the fading sun, the metal gleaming like captured starlight. "Mommy, can they stay for pie?" Emily laughed, a sound light and unburdened, echoing across the lot. "Let's ask." The crew gathered inside as dusk painted the sky in strokes of violet and amber, the diner filling with the warmth of shared plates, apple pie steaming, coffee poured black and strong. Stories flowed like the highway itself, Daniel recounting a desert promise from his military days, Lucas sharing a tale of brotherhood forged in fire, Jonathan lightening the mood with a road yarn that drew giggles from Sophia. Outside, the Harleys stood sentinel, their lines a testament to the chosen family that had rolled into Dusthaven on a whim and stayed for honor. Emily watched from the window, Nathan dozing on a booth cushion, Sophia's head on her lap, the rhythm of their breathing syncing with the soft clink of forks. This was redemption, not flashy but profound, a circle completed, kindness repaid in loyalty's unyielding forge. Harlan's shadow had lifted, exposing the light of justice, moral and true, where corruption crumbled before the power of integrity. The iron promise would ride on at dawn, but their mark lingered, a legacy of sacrifice, where one woman's quiet generosity had united wanderers into warriors for the vulnerable. As the last rays dipped below the horizon, Daniel stepped out, lighting a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his thoughtful gaze. Emily joined him, the cool evening air brushing their skin like a gentle benediction. "What now for you?" she asked, the stars emerging overhead like distant promises kept. He exhaled smoke that curled toward the heavens. "The road calls, but we'll circle back. You've got our word." She nodded, the weight of isolation gone, replaced by the strength of bonds forged in the diner's humble glow. In Dusthaven, whispers of change spread, a town reborn through the silent courage of those who chose family over fate. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable loyalty and quiet redemption. If these tales of honor and chosen family resonate with you, Hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that prove promises endure.